the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, note to homicidal maniacs: when stalking victims on Pluto, cover up the methane footprints you leave with a thin scattering of Blarney and obfuscating Shinola. Plus, we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's Son of the Black Sword. All right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. This time we talk with Sharon Lee and Steve Miller about the latest addition to the Liaden Universe series, Accepting the Lance. Plus, we are joined on the podcast by Baen Publisher Toni Weisskopf. We discuss the book, The Liaden Universe, and the fact that the next Liaden Universe novel is also turned in and will be appearing next year. It's fun conversation. And we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's great high fantasy novel, Son of the Black Sword. Now here's the news. We have new fiction at the Baen.com website. This one is called Next Giant Leap by Patrick Childs. This is a story that is a prequel to Patrick Childs' upcoming novel Frozen Orbit, out in January. Footprints on Other Worlds. The story of the space race is a well-known one. The United States and the USSR locked in Cold War battle to see which side would advance into space the fastest. Despite early victories by the Soviets, America landed a man on the moon first. And though space exploration continues to this day, the moon landing remains the high water mark of manned spaceflight. That's the story we know. But what of cosmonaut Vladimir Vashenko? Though not listed in any history book, his mission would have far-reaching implications, were it ever known. Next Giant Leap by Patrick Childs is now up to read for free at Baen.com and will be perpetually available in the free short story collection, Free Stories 2019, which you can get as a download at Baen.com. So add some hard science fiction goodness to your holidays and check it out. Want to welcome Sharon Lee and Steve Miller to the podcast, as well as Baen Publisher Toni Weisskopf. Hello, folks.
Hello, Tony.
Hi there.
Maine-based writers Sharon Lee and Steve Miller teamed up in the late 1980s to bring the world the story of Kinzel, an inept wizard with a love of cats, a thirst for justice, and a staff of true power. Since then, the husband and wife have, that is Sharon and Steve, have written dozens of short stories and 20-plus novels, most set in their star-spanning Liaden Universe series. Before settling down to the serene and stable life of a science fiction and fantasy writer, Steve was a traveling poet, a rock band reviewer, reporter, and editor of a string of community newspapers. Sharon, less adventurous, she says, perhaps, has been an advertising copywriter, copy editor on Nightside News at a small city newspaper, reporter, photographer, and book reviewer. Both credit their newspaper experiences with teaching them the finer points of collaboration, which they have been doing very effectively for quite some time now. Sharon and Steve passionately believe that reading fiction ought to be fun and that stories are entertainment. Steve and Sharon maintain a web presence at Corville.com, where you can find a lot more about all the stuff we're about to talk about. Out now at booksellers everywhere is Sharon Lee and Steve Miller's new Liaden Universe novel, Accepting the Lance. Let's sort of set the scene before we dive into the book a little bit and perhaps talk about where we are in Liaden Universe and the Liaden Universe timeline. Maybe mention what's gone on in Sherbleak and where Clan Corville finds itself.
We should reassure readers that this is not the last Liaden novel.
Okay.
Yes, we need to do that often.
Yeah. Well, let's start with process then and say, all right, so is there a controversy over this?
There is, yes.
Explain this so we can immediately address it.
We are responding to reader worries that this might be the last ever Liaden novel, which confuses me because I've already read the next one.
Yeah, people have decided that since the real storyline, which is the conflict with the Department of the Interior, this is me extrapolating. I don't know that this is... Since it's gotten a fitting conclusion, that this must be the last book because all the rest of the things we've been talking about somehow aren't storylines. I don't know.
And we do have, pardon me, we do have some readers who I think they get on an adrenaline high when a new book comes out. They read it very rapidly,
yes,
and they figure, this must be it.
This is the last one.
Because they can't see, in the glow of having finished the book, they can't see where it can possibly go further. They forget until 3 weeks or a month later, oh, wait a minute, this line is not finished yet, and whatever happened to...
And this is a fair division of labor because that's why we're writing them and they're reading them. They don't need to know where it goes from here. But yes, we're still working. We still have 4 books. 2 Trader's Leap, which Toni has already read, and 2 Jeffrey books, and then 2 more books. So that's a lot.
That's a lot. So what is the next one's title, by the way? I think it's on this fall schedule.
Yeah, Trader's Leap.
Trader's Leap?
Trader.
Oh.
Yes.
As in Star Trek. Well, clearly, since we have it, it will come out. So, barring the end of the universe. Do you think maybe that readers... I don't want to give any spoilers away, but there's sort of a resounding defeat of the Department of... Department of the Interior, Immunity, the bad guys?
Yeah.
In accepting the Lance, which is really cool.
We're glad to hear you say that, and the fact is that even with what you have read already in accepting the Lance, there are still loose Department of the Interior folks that need to be dealt with.
And which is why Trader's Leap and Accepting the Lance for a long time were one book, because Sharon is out in the trading universe being beset by these people who haven't gotten the orders that they should come home now and stop messing with things.
Oh, that must have been very hard making this 2 books.
It was awful. In late December last year, I went, you know what? This is 2 books and we can only finish one of them. So we had to frog it, as Brenda Clough has taught me this very useful word from knitting. We had to frog it and finish 1 book, which became Accepting the Lance. And frogging from knitting means you have to rip it, and that's why it's called frogging.
And thank you for not calling it Frogging the Lance. Where did the title come from?
The title came from a La Paleka move.
The title comes from very, very early in the entire series.
When back to Agent of Change.
Back to Agent of Change, because there is a move in the dance, quote-unquote dance, that Valcon has learned from his clutch brother. The dance is La Pakala, and one of the moves is called Accepting the Lance. And that's what you do when the best way to take on your opponent is let him strike you.
Let him get in a strike and you keep moving.
And that's where Accepting the Lance came from.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
And that's what she said. Annie, that's it. Anyway, should we set things up a little bit though, so that we're not talking around stuff that people that don't know the series won't know what we're talking about immediately. Can you sort of give a very brief idea of where we are, what's going on as the novel begins?
I wish we were a live video cast, because you would see expressions back and forth between us, like, okay. The Liaden Universe, to begin with, is an action-adventure universe that has a lot of romance in it. And for people who are just encountering it now, it's not only a romance kind of a thing, but we do a lot of sneaky philosophical questions within the storyline. And it started off with an Agent of Change, in which a mercenary soldier, an ex-mercenary soldier actually, is cornered because of her trying to do her job, and is unexpectedly, on many parts, rescued by someone who is a secret agent from another world system. And one group is the Terrans, that would be the people most likely approximating current Earth people. And then there's the Liadens, who are most likely comparative to Earth people.
Regency England, yes.
But with a different social background. And the story starts there and kind of wanders on through, where you begin to learn that the incident in which they became involved has a lot of background. They're not there by accident, and they have families. They have connections with other. The mercenary soldier obviously has connections with mercenaries. The
spy has a family.
The spy has a family, and it's a trading family, and it's a very important trading family. Thus, we set up interstellar trade. Thus, we set up interstellar conflict and espionage, and the combination of the personal with the more obvious military and business conflicts come in together, and there's a lot of interplay between what the people want to do and what they have to do.
And just immediately preceding accepting the lance, the people that we most deal with is a Liaden clan called Clan Corval, who are slightly out of control. They're much more adventurous than most Liaden clans and most Liaden people. And they have gotten themselves into a real pickle because honor demanded that they defend their homeworld by blowing a hole in it to take out a secret enemy base. And for this good work, they've been thrown off the homeworld, and they've had to reestablish themselves on a much less pleasant world, a world called, accurately enough, Shorebleak.
And the combination of these combinations run together with our mercenary soldier. Remember her, Miri from the first book, having a background on this planet called Shorebleak, and suddenly the relationships between the cultures becomes very complex.
Because Shorebleak is a quote-unquote Terran world, and it is not only a Terran world, it's kind of a low-class Terran world. Liadens believe in the sanctity of the contract and one's word of honor, and Shorebleakians kind of believe in it's easier to get forgiveness than permission.
And you don't even need permission if you can get away with it.
So the novel takes place, for the most part, although there's on the world of Shorebleak, where Clan Corval is relocated. And the head of Clan Corval is sort of jointly shared between Valkanyas Phelan and Miri Robertson, who are married now, right? And they also are concurrently the boss, the sort of the road boss, they call them, of a portion of the world, and sort of the mafia dons of the various other families. And Shorebleak itself is a world that has been gutted by a mining company, and then all these people that are there are the descendants of the folks the mining company abandoned when they left, right? It's something like that.
The suits, you should excuse the expression, the suits decided to save themselves, but they didn't want their bottom line to suffer. So instead of transporting everybody out when the umbrella company told them to desert Shorebleak and go someplace else, they just took higher levels of management and stuff, and they left all the workers on Shorebleak. And that way they showed a profit on the enterprise rather than being in the red and having to answer for that.
And then the folks who got left behind had to work within what was the existing culture of the company culture, and as things went downhill, there became things like there was one large road, and then there were a lot of people who had territories off of that road who had been lower level managers, and they trying to control their areas, and they ended up with
and cost effectiveness is very important. So they set up toll booths so that if you passed from one department head's territory to another department head's territory, you had to pay a toll, obviously, and that got in the way of goods getting to the port, and so the port downgraded. What Valcon and Neary have been hired by the Council of Shorebleak to do as road boss is to keep the road open. Nobody charges toll. The road is open for everyone to use for goods coming from the port and for goods going into the port.
So that's one of the conflicts, is that you've got this world that's still trying to figure out how to govern itself. The other is that it is trying to fit into the galactic economy, as it were. And there's this group who are, what are they called? The Terra Trade Survey Team, right? Who are going to approve whether they get to be a real port or not within the Terran Empire.
Within the trading empire, yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, it's the complexity. There's a number of levels of complexity there. Part of it is that having an approval from Terra Trade means that they'll
upgrade the port.
They will upgrade. If they upgrade the port, that means that they'll get larger ships, more important ships, and that they will be put on the schedule. If they are not put on a schedule, then people will likely be warned away, because after all, Corval was banished to this world, in effect.
For breaking open a world.
For breaking open a world, and for events that have happened in other books. They've been accused of piracy, etc. We don't want to give all the background story away there, but because of that, if Corval is seen to be in charge of this planet and the port, people will be warned away from the port. So this is a very important thing for the entire future of the planet
world.
And the trading clan that Corval also is.
Mm-hmm. And you've got the Department of the Interior after them, trying to exact their revenge, and you have the fact that the planet is unstable and might break apart, because that's the reason the mining company did that, I suppose. And we have our old friend the Clutch Turtles taking part once again in it, and they're some of my favorite aliens ever.
Well, the Clutch Turtles live a long time, and so their idea of when something is unstable and in an emergency situation varies quite a lot from a human being's understanding of when we might need to do something about this imminent disaster in how many thousand years was it? So yes, the planet suffers from having been honeycombed, but it's not in imminent danger.
It's not in danger in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
But it is still something that ought to be taken care of.
And since Valcon has ties with the Clutch, and they have sent an expert to actually do an assessment of the planet and figure out how many Clutch workmen need to come to fix this problem, this terrible emergency problem. So there's this other difficulty. Not only Terra Trade thinking that this society is unstable, but the Clutch believing that the physical planet is unstable. And all of this falls on the heads of the Dome of Corval, because they're the ones who thought it was a good idea to blow a hole in a planet.
So that's kind of the larger issues that are the conflict in the story. Maybe I don't know if you want to jump in, Toni, but we could talk about the characters a bit, especially Valcon and Mary, who are sort of the center of a vast web of Liaden Universe characters that we've all come to know and love, like Theo and Dav, and there's just so many.
Well, I think part of Liaden and these guys in particular is seeing the story of what happens after Happily Ever After. These guys have found their soulmates, their second selves, and they still have to get up in the morning and go to the office and deal with the politics and deal with the excited clutch turtles and sort of just watching them do that and how they manage is fun. I think that, that's part of the fun of this universe.
Well, there's kind of a dearth of stories about people who are old married folks. And we're old married folks, and we have to get up every morning. We don't have the clutch turtles, but we do have the coon cats. So yeah, we do. It's putting one foot in front of the other, but still respecting and being committed to your partner. It's a very important thing, and we don't talk about that enough in fiction, in my opinion.
So, and part of what we get to do with those kind of interactions is we get to fall back towards the some of the fun that we get out of works, well, like Georgette Heyer's works, where she's dealing with I hate to say romance because people get the wrong.
Well, yeah, they are romances. They end with a happy ever after.
But also we get to play with the language and the Liaden languages and cultures and the conflict between the interaction and the expectations of a Terran based, which would be Miri, and how she grew up in a world where people could just snatch you off the street, to the Liaden background where everything is formal and
if we're missing a clan member, somebody is going to find out and be answerable.
So there's a lot of
and the answers are going to be completely different.
One of the things that we're doing is because Valcon's family is so diverse. Valcon's half sister is a product of a world where women are the reasoned and logical gender, and men are known to be hot-tempered and they don't think things out. Flighty, yes. And Valcon is, in his society, he's the elder brother, so he has some authority over Theo. And Theo is feeling kind of cranky because of all the things she didn't want to have to do in her life was to have a brother to look after. Valcon is writing to Theo and saying, Theo, please, it's dangerous out there. Please come back home. And she has no compunction whatsoever about obeying this because it has nothing to do with her. And she's left him in the care of a very rational woman, his wife, and there's really no reason for her to do strong oversight at this point. So they're coming at this relationship from sixes and sevens. Yeah.
Yeah, which of course is not at all how Valcon sees it.
No,
right.
He's trying hard, but
And there's an additional conflict there because in the Liaden society, the Delm is the boss of the clan, and in some cases this is a life or death position. He can say, you will go do this to a clan member, and the clan member does it. And it can be a life and death situation. Where Theo, who is his half-sister, has not been, quote-unquote, seen by the Delm. No. She has not been recognized as a clan member, and she does not necessarily she recognizes herself as a sister, but not as a clan member. And so
And meanwhile, their dad is just completely checked out.
And so
which you would also if you had these two kids.
And so you got those kind of cultural conflicts and just the same kind of conflict you can get between brother and sister anyway. And
Valcon writes a letter to Sharon during the course of accepting the lance, and he explains that Theo has in fact come home to Sherblake, and says, and I wouldn't have you think that it was because her brother asked her to. She came home, she honored the family tradition, she came home because she was in a scrape.
Yes.
Well, at the beginning of the book, Theo's in some trouble with the Portmaster, Portmaster Lou, quite a bit, and Bechmo, her sentient ship that she sort of bonded to. She's the main character of some Liaden novels. What's going on with her in accepting the lance?
Well, we're in a strange spot here. We're 2.5 books ahead of you, and we have to sometimes cast our mind back, way back.
Theo came home in Neogenesis because she was in a scrape, and she figured Valcon could help her out of this scrape, and she was not wrong in this. But she was pissed off at somebody and decided that the best way, they had kind of a wager going, whether who would arrive at Sherblake first, and the other pilot had dared to intimate that Bishimo was not going to be there first. So Theo felt that the need, and her crew agreed to make a point. So when they arrived, they just put little recording devices here and there in orbit saying, "Hey there, Pilot X, we got here first."
And so when that ship arrived, they happened to be close enough to one of these devices. The net went off and said, "Ta-da, we see you, welcome." And it went off across the broad beam, so every ship heard it anywhere around in the system.
And the portmaster heard it, and the portmaster realized there was an unauthorized device in her lanes, which is not a good thing.
And so she had to come down hard on people who would be so rude as to do this.
And the reason that she has to come down really hard on Theo is because TerraTrade, remember TerraTrade? The survey team is there, and TerraTrade, at least one of the survey team members believes that Sherblake should be listed as a don't call port, which is...
It should be isolated,
It should be isolated, which means the planet will die. Because Corval is a resident on this port, they want it to be listed as a pirate port, basically. So the portmaster, instead of just reading Theo the Riot Act and finding her, has to not only throw the book at her, but also put a sanction on her license, because that's showing good, strong leadership. We don't put up with this crap, even if you are part of Clan Corval.
And the problem is that Theo can't agree to being part of Clan Corval, but she can't deny being Valcon's sister. And this is a hard point of view to get across to people.
The way that all of this comes together is just really beautiful, and an incredibly satisfying ending for accepting the lance, which tangentially brings us to the issue of AI. And this is something that's a problem for science fiction writers, because it's the potential of AI is so huge that it just changes everything. You know, we're talking about the singularity and things like that. And it's interesting how you guys have handled that in the Liaden world. How has that evolved?
How has it evolved? Jeez.
Yeah. How has that evolved? You mean within the universe that we're talking about, or within our writings?
Well, I think with just your thinking about AI from the beginning, because you guys started this this series and the conception of this universe, a couple decades ago. So how has your thinking about AI changed since you started this?
Well, we first started out thinking that it would be kind of cool to have a robot butler, and of course he would be named Jeeves. And
Right.
What better clan to have a robot butler than Corball, the outlier? So that was just a piece of the household. It's they had a butler. Their butler's a robot. Hey, so what? But then we got to thinking about it,
and then we got to thinking about it. And one of the points that came out very early is that as we were working with it was that this in fact was a robot in a society that was already distrustful of AIs. Well, why were they distrustful?
Well, because of the war.
There had been wars in which AIs had been extremely potent, and so potent that they had to be destroyed. And so AIs were more or less banned.
And I'm not even sure. The complex logic laws popped up at one point of why we couldn't do something. And I remember writing it down, and then Steve went over the typescript that night, as we do. And he said, the complex logic laws, what are those? And I went,
and they weren't Asimov's laws.
No.
And
right.
so we frequently do build that way. The backstory filled itself in about a great war, and in the way that such things happen with us. When we're writing the larger threads, the novels, we sometimes come across ideas that need expansion, and we expand them later. And we later did get into how Jeeves became a member of the household, and it wasn't easy, and there was a lot of luck involved. But of course, luck is a big part of the universe.
And the other thing that we do as writers is, Steve alluded to it as, there's these threads that need to be picked up. But often it's that we are writing and we sort of litter the landscape with things that are needed, like Jeeves, or the complex logic laws. And then when we go back to when we start another story, those nuggets are there for us to use. And you know why we can't do this? Oh, wait, the complex logic laws. Oh, but wait a minute, why? Okay, the war, and of course, even though the AIs were fighting for human masters, we will ban not human masters, of course, but AIs, because they did the damage. Okay, now we have this of laws, but we've already created ships that are self-aware, and some of them went into hiding. We didn't get them all. There's no way we could have got them all. And now we have a situation. Capital S.
Yes, a large capital situation. And this is not the first. The AI is not the first example of the way we do work out from an from a small point in the story, and build it over time. Because like the characters, we try to let the universe tell us who it is and where it is, rather than trying to push it into a bin. I was on a panel in Boscone at Boscone a few years ago with some. I was lucky to be there, very heavyweight writers, and they were explaining about one of them had a helper who keeps track of her storyline and maintains all her databases of her storylines. And while we were discussing it, the point came up about, well, that means you find yourself in a spot where you say, I can't go in this direction because that's not in the canon. And we've been lucky because we don't have...
We don't have a canon.
there is a canon, but it's got room for expansion rather than being a net. And that the AI... The stuff we've done with the AI is part of that.
Well, and the Liaden Universe started out being freewheeling anyhow. I mean, why the heck can't we have robots? And I've been on any number of panels proving that you can't have interstellar trade. But but for the story, we'll have interstellar trade. Why not? So
Right.
we haven't really. Yeah, it's space opera outside the space opera box that some people want to insist is there. You can't have sentient aliens. Why not? We have sentient aliens and we'll play with them. Basically, we wanted to play. So that's what we're doing.
Very early on, and Sharon has been quoted on this a number of times. What we said when we started. If this isn't fun, if we can't have fun with this, we won't do it.
Yeah.
23 books down, we're still having fun.
We're still having fun. And sometimes we giggle. And sometimes people will come up to us. We will have people come up to us and said, I was rereading this book, and I just found this. Did you know what you did here? Well, yes, I did know what I did there. I know why. We put nuggets, or what are they called? Easter eggs from the various stories, because Sharon and I grew up on science fiction. We've read many of the original
the classics.
The classics, and not only the classics, but the sci-fi classics. So we come from the background of Heinlein and Andre Norton and David Keller, for God's sake. And so we have a lot of background. Tony laughs at that one, but really, we did. We read them.
They were there.
He was one of the science fiction doctors, right? He did doctor stories.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
Yeah, I don't remember him, but I do remember the stories. So, yeah, I mean, for my part, as a someone who came from science fiction fandom, I appreciate things like the Norbear named Hevelin, for instance. Yeah.
There's a few other plot threads and people that play significant roles in Accepting the Lance. Maybe mention a couple of those. What about the couple that you've euthaned, as you say? The euthaning of is Dav, right? And the woman that was sort of inside him for you. Maybe explain that.
Okay. Once upon a time, we had a decision that the universe, as it had been, wasn't as an agent of change.
In Agent of Change, Valkon explains to Miri what happened to his father and his mother. And in so much as when it's published, that is when it's written in stone. We were stuck with that.
And we also had the situation that Valkon and Miri, having come across each other, and as Tony had alluded to a little earlier, found their second selves, that they were actually, call it psychically linked, and that psychic linking had a name called life mating.
And this is something that established itself around about Carpe Diem. We knew Valkon and Miri had found each other and that they were meant for each other, but we hadn't understood that there was a mechanism in the universe that would allow for this, which was not necessarily Corval's luck, because we hadn't done Corval's luck yet.
No, we hadn't gotten there yet. But there is a mechanism, and Dav and Aliana met. Aliana got herself off of Liad. This is one of the things Liaden, the Corval clan had been after for years. She managed to get herself essentially off of Liad, and then she had the speed and nerve to step in front of a bullet meant for her life mate. And when she died, she didn't entirely go away. Her consciousness was not, because of this bond between them. She didn't die.
It took up residence in what we have to assume is the vast, endless real estate that was available in Dav's head.
And in any case, so the youthening again becomes part of a twisty thread that goes back to a character named the Uncle, and
we haven't even thought of the Uncle yet when we wrote this. Whoa!
We had the Uncle, because we needed. How do I do this? When the very first time we set we looked at the possible idea of writing a novel called Agent of Change. We sat down and
which was called Balkan and Mary on Mars.
Yeah, we sat down and we talked about it that night at the dinner table, and then we talked through the night, finished a bottle or two, got up in the morning, and we had outlined 7 books, which were to be the original Agent of Change series. But at that point, even at that point, we knew that there was at least one story before and possibly a few more. And those stories eventually got written.
Yeah, those stories, which are now the crystal books, or the blue book and the red book, the blue book and the yellow book, as one bookseller told us. The crystal books we tried like 4 times to write. There were all kinds of starts around here. And we finally, and this is a situation, the writers say, oh, I wasn't old enough to write that book. But this was an actual chronological, we didn't understand until we were in our 40s what it meant really to be middle-aged and having fought your entire life and you know you're going to lose.
And that's part of what happened in the crystal books. And the crystal books are part of the background that actually feeds into the entire later expansion and understanding of what it is to be life-mated. And the uncle who appears in the crystal books, and then in later in Balance of Trade and other books, the uncle brought with him the technology that permitted a re-embodiment, let's call it. And again, we tried not to be flip about these possibilities and tried to look at them not from necessarily scientifically, but philosophically.
Well, from the science fiction standpoint, what if we could do this?
And so Dav and Aliana do make a return after both of them have suffered tremendous harm.
Tremendous harm, and Dav was dying. Aliana was dead. I mean, how much worse can it get? And now our young cousins are back
trying to get their scout license or pilot license.
No, they're pilot licenses. They want to be couriers. They want to go back to being couriers.
Well, they have to get paper again. They exist, but until we get the red tape taken care of, it's a problem.
And the Dome has said, okay, we can construct citizenship papers for you. I mean, we're old hands at this. We can make you real, but you will test. You will test as pilots, and whatever you test that's what your license is going to be. If you test as third class, that's it.
We can't give you that. You've got to be able to do what your license actually says. So there's an awful lot of what we do depends on the Regency the Regency understandings, the Regency idea of you are who you really are, and if you act out of that range, you shouldn't. You can't just say, my name is this, and get by with it.
And I am the Duke of Mumbledy-Pig. No, there's got to be a Mumbledy-Pig.
No, don't do.
I mean, well, that's what's so cool about Clan Corval and the whole Liaden, the whole system is it really is a group of people who have adopted on an interstellar basis this sort of 19th century European nobility ideal of itself, and they try to live up to it.
The Liaden Universe, the Liadens actually owe a lot to Georgette Harris' Regency romances, which translates so well into a science fictional universe that it's almost scary.
And we do have to admit that one of the series that Sharon and I had both read independently before we met and moved in with each other, and both had enjoyed and both had gone out saying, where the heck's the next one, was Alexei Panchin's what was the
Tony Villiers,
the Anthony Villiers series, which was also kind of straight from the Regency.
Yeah.
And it was a
So the idea was not original with us, actually.
but he was doing it. I think he was doing it for fun, and he got 3 books in, and then realized he had written himself into so many corners that there wasn't an easy way out. And what we've been able to do is, by not writing as closely to the thread, to the Regency thread.
He was doing the surface. He was doing the clothes and the gaming hells, and he was skimming, sort of. And in order to get 7 books rather than 3 books, you got to go deeper. And by the time Toni was a Wonder or a Marvel, he couldn't go any deeper.
Yeah, we had that background before us, the same way. Anne McCaffrey had read our books and enjoyed them greatly. Anne was a fan, and she was for a while. For several books, she was
She was our beta reader.
A beta reader. She was before us. She was before us too. So we had Andre Norton, who we had corresponded with at several points. Had dealt with some of the same kind of issues, some of the psychic possibilities,
and the Forerunners.
So we didn't invent this out of the whole cloth, but boy, we got a running start at what we needed from what the other people had done.
We have a very rich universe.
And you certainly made it your own. I mean, these are certainly inspirations, but none of these things are. You just took somebody else's system and applied it to tell your stories. Your system and your interpretation is unique, and I think fun for that.
Just agree with her. So what else can we say about Accepting the Last that we might, or what's going on now with the Liaden Universe, your other work?
I am doing the revisions for Trader's Leap as per Toni. It's going slowly since I'm still recovering from surgery, which I found out is an enterprise all in itself. I thought they would say, okay, you can walk now and you can just go back to normal, but that turns out to not be so.
So the process that we've been going through recently, among other things, we came up as we were writing the last several books, actually back to Genesis, and we kept coming up with characters on the side. So we've written a couple of novellas and short stories on the side, which have been in some of the chapbooks. And we find those people creeping in, oddly enough, and suddenly they're
got to keep in touch with the home people.
And suddenly those people thread their way into the novels that especially into Trader's Leap.
Yeah, that's true.
This is probably a good time to mention the flow chart. You want to tell the listeners about the flow chart on Baen.com?
Where you can jump into the Liaden Universe?
Yes.
You can find that at the website, the Baen.com website. You can also find these novellas and short stories that Sharon and Steve have written, including the one that supports Accepting the Last that we just had up. Those are all available in the Free Stories. This one, Free Stories 2019 download. But these the flowcharts we have, they are basically they give you a little bit of an idea of the Liaden novels and the stories and the novellas and everything that connects together, and they give you a really good idea of how to of ways to get into this vast universe, which can seem daunting, but the thing is, there's so many entryways into this series that a lot of series you need to start somewhere or another, but this one you can really jump into at certain points and experience and just sort of spread out, and those can help you.
We did that on purpose. The short stories are also collected in Liaden Universe Constellations 1, 2, 3, and 4 now, and we're working on 5, Toni.
Yay!
And there's so much we can mention. There's the Badal Udari, the Boss Blake challenge, but maybe we could close it out with a final thought about accepting the lance.
I think the thing for us with accepting the lance, it wasn't the easiest book for us to work with, as Sharon had been pointing out, because we had a lot going, and at the same time, we didn't think it would be fair to the other Toni there, Toni Weisskopf, to turn in a 300,000-word book if she was expecting 120,000 words. So, and also for our regular readers who are at this point are used to a particular.
It has to be a length where they can sit down after supper and read it and finish just as the alarm is going off, so they have to go to work.
And so to do that for some of the readers, so it really was. It wasn't the easiest of the books to write, especially in trying to make sure that we did not leave a thread that would be confusing.
Right. And there's a lot of threads in this book. There are a lot of things happening.
And it does, in fact, collect a great deal of the previous storyline and bring a number of the storylines together. But it is not by any means an end to all of the threads or all of the stories.
No, because people's lives keep going on. Corval still needs to finish settling on Shoreblake. Shoreblake needs to accommodate itself to Corval. The future is still in the future. People are still moving.
And Theo is still out there, so you can't be
done
yet. Theo is still out there, and we've hardly mentioned her at all. And she gets up to some interesting trouble in this one. So
she tends to get into trouble.
And so there are so many threads. And one of the fun things for us is that when we go to conventions, and a lot of times we'll have a chance to sit down at a coffee clutch where you sit around with 10 or 12 fans, and they all ask you questions. And we can be talking about the same book and have 7 different people say, my favorite character in this book is, and it's not the same character. We can have people have 5, 6 different favorite characters out of a book. So I guess we're hitting it right, because people do fall in like, at least, if not further, with the characters, and we get to play. So what's not to like?
Yeah, I just want to say that as an editor and as a reader, I appreciate you guys going to the trouble to take these books and turn them into 2 books, that 2 completely and utterly satisfying books, because it would have been easier to just leave it as one giant 300,000 word thing, but you didn't. And you took into consideration the reader's expectations, and I think you gave them what it was that was going to make them happiest. And I really, really appreciate you doing that.
Oh, thank you. That makes it was hard, as you know, but it makes it better. And Trader's Leap, we were able to do things that had it been part of a bigger book, we wouldn't have been able to do.
Yeah, and not to get to rub it in too much, but it's so much fun. You guys are going to really enjoy that too.
Well, the book out right now at booksellers everywhere is Accepting the Lance by Sharon Lee and Steve Miller. Sharon and Steve and Toni, thank you all so much for being on the podcast today and talking about Accepting the Lance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And a reminder that this is a lovely winter holiday gift.
Hell yeah.
Well, great gift.
Available in audio, ebook, and hardback.
Yes, indeed.
Now we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correia, Book 1 in the Saga of the Forgotten Warrior. After the War of the Gods, the demons were cast out and fell to the world. Mankind was nearly eradicated by the seemingly unstoppable beasts, until the gods sent the great hero Ram Rowan to save them. He united the tribes, gave them magic, and drove the demons into the sea. But as centuries passed, the descendants of the great hero grew in number and power. They became tyrannical and cruel, and their religion nothing but an excuse for greed. The people rose up, and the surviving royalty and their priests were made casteless, condemned to live as untouchables. The age of law had begun. Ashok Vidal has been chosen by a powerful ancient weapon to be its bearer. He is a protector, a member of an ancient military order of roving law enforcers. No one is more merciless in rooting out those who secretly practice the old ways as Ashok. But Ashok isn't who he thinks he is. And when he finds himself on the wrong side of the law, the consequences lead to rebellion, war, and perhaps transformation. Now here is the latest entry in Larry Correia's Son of the Black Sword.
Ashok accepted the hit and kept pushing. It took more than that to rattle a protector's brain. They were too close. Neither could get their swords in, so instead Ashok swung his shield, turning it and slamming the edge into Nadan's helmet. That staggered him. He kept swinging, hitting him over and over. A deer antler snapped off and flew into the air. The steel deformed. But with a hiss, Nadan brought his sword up, and the flat caught Ashok in the chest. Ashok fell, sliding and rolling down the bridge, not stopping until he hit the warm softness of a corpse. The air filling his lungs tasted like fire and blood, but Ashok sprang right back up. His shield was nothing but useless splinters dangling from frayed straps, so he flung it away. Nadan was coming down the bridge toward him, massive sword cleaving downward, and at the last instant Ashok noticed that the right side of Nadan's helmet had been so deformed by the repeated shield strikes that one eye slit had been crushed nearly closed. Ashok flung himself that way as the executioner's blade cleaved the dead Somsak soldier in half. Nadan tried to turn, but Ashok was already circling on his blind side, looking for a vulnerable point. Finding a narrow gap at the waist, Ashok struck. Angruvidal hit cleanly between the plates, and he pulled it into the cut with all his might, letting the black steel edge eat its way through. Mail and quilting split, and the ancestor blade bit deep into the flesh beneath. Nadan let out an inhuman shriek. The huge shield flew around and hit him. It was like being rammed by an elephant, and the blow knocked Ashok clear back to the bottom of the castless side of the bridge. He lay there for just a moment, figuring out which muscles had torn and which bones had cracked, but knowing it was worth it since he'd struck a mortal blow. You couldn't cut up as many men as Ashok had without gaining nearly a surgeon's knowledge of anatomy. He was certain he'd just sliced Nadan Somsak's kidney in half. But the warrior was still up and coming his way fast. He rolled out of the way as the giant sword smashed more of the bridge into dust. Nadan should have been dying, but he wasn't even slowing. If anything, he was moving even faster than before. Just as the heart of the mountain kept him alive, the demon's tongue must have been doing the same for Nadan. Since Angruvidal had battered his shield into deformed scrap, the demon man threw it down in disgust and took up his huge sword in both hands. Getting to his feet, Ashok was barely able to stay ahead of Nadan's blade. Blood and something else was pouring out of the terrible wound in Nadan's side. There were two streams, one red and the other white as milk, almost as if there were two separate beings living inside the Thakur's armor. Gritting his teeth, Ashok vowed to destroy them both. They were on the castless side now. Ashok backed away slowly as Nadan stalked him. The warriors were following them across, eager to see their house regain its former greatness. Ashok hadn't been exaggerating when he'd spoken of their courage and dedication. They may have been brutes, but they had honor of a sort. The Somsak deserved to know the truth before it was too late. "You want to claim Angruvidal?" Ashok spread his arms wide. "Then this duel must be legal." "Insufficient," Nadan hissed. I grant you nothing. Not for me. This duel is unfair to you. Your vision is impaired. I'll wait while you take your helmet off. Nadan may have been a hot-headed fool, but he wasn't stupid. Either he knew drawing on the demon's power was twisting his body into something else, or he at least suspected it enough not to take the chance. Nadan leapt forward, covering far more ground than even a protector could have at his best. And then the executioner's blade was flashing back and forth again, nearly too fast to follow. The combined instincts of 50 generations were the only thing that kept him alive. Faster and faster, the two foes moved, striking and countering, hitting with blows that would have snapped regular blades or left them bent and useless. Another mighty attack came flying downward. Unable to move in time, Ashok raised Angruvidal in both hands and intercepted it. The impact felt like it would rupture every joint in his body. They clashed and locked there, with the far stronger demon pushing hard, sliding Ashok across the ice. The black steel blade was shoved inexorably downward. If he faltered, he would die. Angruvidal warned him of the incoming danger, but there was nothing he could have done, nowhere he could have moved to. So all he could do was grimace as the crossbow bolt embedded itself deep into his abdomen. Razor-sharp steel pierced his stomach. Ashok gasped. Nadan saw it and laughed in his face. Excellent! Ashok had already killed too many of their brothers for all of the Somsak to be concerned about the sanctity of a duel. Several others launched their bolts as well. Most missed, but another flew cleanly through his calf, severing strands of muscle and exiting in a fat shower of blood. His leg collapsed, useless beneath him, and Ashok fell. Nadan's sword embedded itself into the ground, inches from his head. Enough! The Black Heart's mine to kill, not yours. Rolling over, Ashok had to stick Angruvidal into the ice so he could lever himself back to his feet. One knee kept buckling, so he balanced on one foot until the heart of the mountain forced the damaged muscles to work again. All of his strength was flowing out of his stomach. His extremities felt cold, clumsy, and dead. Nadan watched, mocking him, but Ashok couldn't make out the words over the ringing in his ears. There was no crime greater than consorting with demons, and no army was that loyal to their champion. If he exposed Nadan's transgression in time, then Jarlang might be spared from the Somsak's further wrath. Desperate, Ashok made his decision. The sword warned him the risk was too great and that escape was still possible. Forgive me, Angruvidal. Let my death have some meaning, at least. He would do this one last thing to uphold the law, and then go into the endless nothing, content. Are you certain? In all the years he had carried it, even in the times when it had been his only companion, the sword had never used words before. I am, Ashok whispered past the blood spilling from his lips. Ready to die, Ashok slowly limped toward Nadan Somsak, intent on removing that helmet. He sincerely hoped that Thera and Kita had escaped. Omand and the judges would be so disappointed to hear that he'd not perished like a criminal, after all. Ashok peered into the black steel resting in his hand. My final hope is that your next bearer proves to be more worthy than I have been. Nadan Somsak saw him coming and laughed. They both knew this was the end. The army held its breath as their demonic champion lifted his sword in both hands. The executioner's blade flashed, but rather than avoid it, Ashok suddenly stepped into the killing arc, driving Angruvidal upward, directly into his opponent's helmet. Angruvidal exploded.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correia. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And presents and goodies from two universes colliding and creating excellent snacks, plus thanks and praise to Baen Publisher Toni Weisskopf and to Sharon Lee and Steve Miller, authors of Accepting the Lance. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.